Hello, and welcome to Design Thinking for Navigating Next, Part 2. In Part 1, you learned about design thinking and how you can use it to solve complex problems. In this video, we are going to focus on the execution piece. You empathized, defined a need, and you're ready to test your strategy. But how do you ensure successful execution of your design? That is going to be our focus for today. Building on design thinking, we're going to talk about executing with the 4 disciplines of execution. My name is Sarah Perryman, and I'm the redesign coordinator at KSDE. I've been with the agency since 2018, and before that, I was a high school ELA and ESOL teacher for 5 years. I'm joined by my friend Katie. Katie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Katie Perez. This is my 6th year as a consultant with SDOC. Prior to that, I worked at all levels of elementary, including instructional coaching. I focus primarily here on redesign efforts and trauma-informed schools, and I'm also certified through Franklin Covey to facilitate 4 disciplines of execution.
Thanks so much, Katie. Before we move on, we would like to invite you to open up the slides and follow along, or save the slide deck for later. Today, we want to focus on 3 things. 1, we want to spend some time talking about how the 4 disciplines of execution support the steps of design thinking. We want to help you select a big idea so that you can then work through an execution challenge. There is a bit.ly link there for you to open up the execution challenge document. We would invite you to do that now so that you can continue to take notes as you're finishing this video. And so we want to start by talking about design thinking and how it connects to the 4 disciplines of execution. So in redesign, our process of continuous improvement comes from blending the 2 models. So our redesign specialists, Jay Scott and Tammy Mitchell, worked with Dr. Liang out of K-State to research and validate this process. And in doing so, they created this blended graphic. So the 4 disciplines of execution begin with focusing on what's wildly important. As you define your goals based off of empathizing, you're engaging in this first discipline. You define your goal areas and you determine the pieces of data that you ultimately want to impact with your work. We call this your lag measure because it lags behind the work. By executing on your strategies, by working to improve your goal area, you're ultimately wanting to move what piece of data? That's the lag measure. So the lag measure will often align with the state board outcomes like graduation or post-secondary effective rate. As you begin to ideate and brainstorm strategies that you prototype or plan out for implementation, you're preparing to act on your lead measures. Those lead measures, those strategies, are what lead you to results or movement closer to your lag measure. And once you begin testing, you will want to keep a compelling scoreboard, meaning that you have a way to track your progress and your impact. And you also want to create that cadence of accountability where you can reflect on your progress and iterate or pivot as needed. Keeping a compelling scoreboard and creating a cadence of accountability represent disciplines 3 and 4 respectively. These disciplines challenge you to answer the question, is what I am doing working? And how do I know? Without scoreboards and accountability meetings, successful implementation falls flat. So now let's learn a little bit more from Katie about how you can get started using those 4 disciplines and selecting your big idea.
Thanks, Sarah. So right now we want to invite you to open up the document that is linked here on the bit.ly if you have not already. So go ahead and open that up. And that is a working page that you can go through to help you identify what might your big idea be and how might you use these 4 disciplines to work through that process. So go ahead and take a moment to open that up now. And what we're going to talk about now is the process of selecting the biggest idea for your goal. So I'm sure, all systems have lots of goals that we're trying to achieve on a regular basis. The problem is the more goals we have, the fewer actually fall all the way through execution. We don't always achieve all of our goals if we're not putting special intentional focus on them. So the big idea between the 4 disciplines of execution is that without intentional action on our part, our wildly important goals will always remain on the corner of a good idea and never going to happen. And I'm sure if you take a few moments, you can think of goals that you've had in your personal and professional life that have remained at that intersection. And we don't want that to happen anymore. We can't afford for that to happen anymore. So what we need to do is we need to get really clear about what are the biggest goals we have and how can we use something like 4DX to figure out the fewest moves it takes to win that game. And so our first step here is going to be just to do a little bit of a brain dump and try to think, what goals are you really currently striving to accomplish within your organization? And what strategies are you using right now to ensure their success? So we're going to invite you to take a moment here just to pause the video. On your working page document there, you have some spots where you can just do a little bit of a brain dump and think, what are you trying to accomplish? And what strategies are you using right now to ensure their success? Okay. So now that you've taken a moment to do that, we really want to think about what limits our ability to achieve these big goals. And it's really not a big surprise or a big secret that it's this imminent threat of a whirlwind, right? So we come into work every single day and we have the best intentions to get everything on our to-do list done. And then what happens? Like life, school happens, right? There are actual living human beings inside of the system we work in that suck the time and energy we have dedicated to special focus, and there's never enough time. And so in order to keep our goal in the forefront of our minds, we have to put special attention to the action it will take to drive it forward. The whirlwind of our daily job will always take over any extra time we have if we allow it to do so. And so whenever you are trying to put special attention and focus towards a big goal, we have to stop to first identify what is it that's within that whirlwind. So again, we're going to invite you to pause here for a moment and just jot down what are the things that exist in your daily whirlwind that limit your ability to focus on your big goals. The point of 4DX is to help us identify where we can set aside that whirlwind and how we can put special attention focus on the big goal that we have. So take a moment, pause here, and identify your whirlwind.
So now we're going to walk you through an execution challenge. So if you haven't been taking notes on that organizer, again, we would invite you to open up using that bit.ly link and follow along and take notes through this execution challenge. So the first discipline of execution asks you to focus on what is wildly important. That's your goal. Sometimes you hear it called a WIG, a wildly important goal. So why do we start by focusing on the wildly important? Well, this allows us to identify a starting line, a finish line, and a deadline. We're here and we want to be there. We're narrowing that gap. We're focusing in on what it is that we want to intentionally address. Focusing on the wildly important calls us to create a change in our behavior. We name our focus by creating a goal. We put our intention and our effort into working on it and toward that goal. You know that you've narrowed your focus down to what's wildly important when your goal is aligned with your data and aligned to your mission and vision. You know that you've narrowed down your focus when your goal is measurable now, it's tied to data. Think back to design thinking and the data collected during empathizing. The measurement piece helps you define that goal. You can focus on the wildly important because there's collective ownership. All stakeholders can see how this goal is tied to what's happening in the organization. And you know you have a clear focus when it can be impacted by your performance. It sets you up to act on your lead measures and your strategies. So before we move into that second discipline of execution, we would invite you to pause this video and narrow down what it is that you want to focus on. What is wildly important for you right now? Once you've done that, we'll turn it over to Katie to talk about our second discipline.
So now we have a big goal. And it's going to remain at that intersection of a good idea and never going to happen if we don't put that special focus on it. So how do we do that? How do we really make the moves towards achieving the goal? Well, what we have to have are lead measures. Sarah did a fantastic job of explaining what that lag measure is, right? That wildly important goal, we're here and we want to be there. And in order to do that, we have to know what are the points that are going to provide the most leverage to us achieving that goal. And so that's where we get discipline 2, act on the lead measures. And the focus word here is leverage. It's something that's going to move the needle towards our wildly important goal. These are high impact ideas that are influenceable by our team. And what they do is they help us stay focused on our WIG. So to create the lead measures, we want to think about as many possibilities as we can. And then we identify the 2 to 3 best lead measures that are going to drive our action towards meeting our goal. You know, what it is here is that there's a big difference between knowing a thing and knowing the data behind a thing. And that's what the lead measures help us do. An example that's often given here is weight loss, right? We can all want to lose a few pounds, but if we don't know that it's eating right and exercising, that scale's never going to move. We can influence our weight loss by acting on those lead measures. Now, lead measures must be new behaviors, or they must raise the quality of old behaviors. Otherwise, all we're doing is the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which I believe we all know might be the definition of insanity, right? So what we need to do is we need to identify what are the predictive, measurable, influenceable, ongoing team played games that are going to help us meet that goal. And we want to write them in a way that tells us that if we do this, then this will happen. So we want to move from here to there by doing this. So we're going to invite you again here to pause and brainstorm what might be the steps you need to take to provide leverage to meet your wildly important goal. So as you think about this, we want to be able to identify if our lead measures are truly going to help us. And so we're going to give you another example of redesign. Within redesign, we know that we want to be able to test our strategies, determine the needs for implementation that we have, and communicate with all stakeholders. I'm guessing that when you brainstorm, you wrote down things like this. We want to take it a little bit deeper with lead measures. I'll be honest, lead measures are one of the hardest things to write. You know where you want to be. It's hard to truly identify how you get there. So I want you to take a look back at the lead measures you wrote down. And if you have something that sounds pretty simple, like test strategies, determine needs for implementation, and communicate with all stakeholders, those are great, but we need to know how you're going to do that. So you can look here at the deeper example of that, right? The test strategies, we want to write that in a way that's actionable. So perhaps to test a strategy, it might sound like we're going to implement soft starts according to the blueprint 5 days a week, beginning on February 10, 2020. And we're going to review implementation data weekly to determine pivots and revisions. That tells us exactly how we're going to provide leverage towards that goal. It's more specific than simply test strategies. Determine needs for implementation. Yes, we need to do that. How do we know we've done it? Well, we know we've done it if we are identifying human, financial, and capacity resources that are needed to sustain our prototype by April 9, 2020. Provides that specificity, the verb, the quality, the consistency, and the scale that we're going to need to meet that goal. Communicate with all stakeholders. We're going to communicate with stakeholders weekly. Again, it tells us how we're going to do this and how frequent. So the next piece is to keep a compelling scoreboard. Now, this part seems to be the one that hangs up people the most, because we want to create something that is engaging and helps us know where we're at in the game. And we get a little caught up on the way it looks and what we're tracking and forget that the whole point here is how we're really using this data to move. So I want you to think about this the same way you think about formative assessment in a classroom, okay? You are tracking data with kids, right? You're giving them assessments along the way and you're using the data from those assessments to design your instruction to help you know the student progress and to know if you're really meeting the goal you have. That's the same thing here with the compelling scoreboard, right? We stay more emotionally engaged in a game when we know the score and if we know we're winning or not. And so the idea of a compelling scoreboard is for it to be designed by and for the players, right? It's where are we now and where should we be? So again, the goal here is to keep it simple. It needs to be simple, visible. It needs to be complete and show all of the data you're looking for. It needs to be compelling. You need to want to look at it. And when you look at it, get excited about the game that you're playing. It should be personal. It should fit in with your team's style and be able to reflect how excited you are about this game that you're playing and where you're going, right? And so you might want to have a digital scoreboard and an analog scoreboard. Both are correct. In fact, I'm going to tell you that there is really no wrong place to keep the data as long as it is secure and it's only for the eyes who should be seeing it. And two, you will go see it frequently. The entire point here is that it increases your engagement. And once we've increased engagement and we know where we're at, we stay focused on our goals more often. Now, it also needs to show the data you have, the lag measure, and the lead measure. And so there are things that you need to discuss with your team as you consider how you're going to create a scoreboard that is the most engaging. So here are some questions you might want to discuss. What data already exists to show our present state? How and what data are we going to collect and how will it be displayed and where will it be displayed? Who's going to need to have access to that data? How will this data help us monitor implementation and effectiveness? And when will teams have dedicated time to review and respond to data? I'm actually going to go right back to that second to last bullet. How will the data help us monitor implementation and effectiveness? The point of the scoreboard is not to simply tick off every single time you've done an action towards your goal. So let's take the example of a school doing soft starts. We are not solely looking at how many soft starts did we do in a week. We're looking at, did we do them with the criteria that we set? And what was the impact of that soft start? So if I'm doing soft starts because I think it will reduce tardies and attendance, reduce tardies and increase attendance, then I need to be tracking those two things as well. We're looking at not how often something is happening, but how it's moving us towards our bigger goals. Okay, so that's a lot. So we're going to go ahead and pause here again and give you some time to discuss these questions and think about what's going to create the most compelling scoreboard for your team.
So now we'll take some time to talk about the last discipline, which involves creating a cadence of accountability. So a cadence of accountability means establishing a routine of weekly commitment meetings that are focused on your wildly important goal. So during these meetings, you should be reviewing and reporting on your commitments that you made in the previous week. You're also stating your commitments for the upcoming week. These meetings should be brief. They should be specific and aligned with the goal and the strategy, and they're timely. They're focused on one thing at a time. The conversation is only about the goal or the strategy. You're answering the questions, what did you say you would do? And how did it go? What will you do this week to keep moving you in the right direction? If you think that you're going to need more time to dialogue, bring that and ask that a formal meeting be scheduled to allow time for that discussion. It shouldn't happen in these weekly accountability meetings. They should be brief and focused. To create a cadence of accountability, you can work through these 3 steps, and it can take less than 10 minutes. You're reporting on last week's commitments, reviewing and updating that scoreboard, and making commitments for next week. So an example of what that might look like would be looking at these 3 examples that we had. So if you want to keep with that STEM example for testing your strategies, you might say that this week I'm going to be ordering bins. If you're working with the determining needs for implementation, you might say today, to move us toward our goal, I'm going to create a project budget for the materials that we need. Or if your goal is to communicate with all of those stakeholders, this week, you might be interviewing students to gather their perceptions on school social media. So at this time, we would ask that you pause and reflect on these questions regarding establishing a cadence of accountability. So by answering these questions, you can begin to create a process of learning how to do what you do, only better. So take a moment and pause and think through these questions before we wrap up our learning for today.
So now that we've taken a little bit of time to think about how we can blend design thinking with the 4 disciplines of execution, we hope that you see this process is one that will really help you move towards achieving those big goals. We walk through the design thinking process on such a regular basis in our job as educators that sometimes we forget that we need a little extra push to actually make things happen in a sustainable way. And so when you think about that design process, we want you to begin layering on how do we really focus when we're defining on that wildly important goal? What is it that we are truly trying to achieve? And how do we know when we get there? Then when we ideate and we prototype, we are acting on those lead measures. We are constantly thinking about ideas and strategies that are going to help us support that wildly important goal that we've already defined. And then as we test, we are keeping compelling scoreboards that really make it easy and clear for us to see if this is a game we are winning or if we need to pivot. And that cadence of creating a cadence of accountability is what creates that culture of change within your system. This is a team game that we are playing. Everyone is a player and everyone is going to contribute to the winning of our successful design thinking plan.
So this was video 2 in a 3-part series over design thinking for Navigating Next. The 3rd installment is a live event that will be hosted on April 20th, 2021 from 9 to 10 a.m. During this live event, schools and districts can receive support in creating a plan and preparing for the beginning of the 21-22 school year using this blended process of design thinking and the 4 disciplines of execution to help you in navigating next. During this live training, you'll reflect on learning environment considerations and you'll plan for the future by creating a solution using these design thinking and 4DX challenges. You can use the link on this slide to register for that live event. Thank you so much for joining us today, and Katie will close us out.
So again, thanks for joining us today. And in order to receive your certificate for completion of this session, please complete the form below. A certificate will be mailed to you to the address that you list, so make sure you fill it out correctly within 24 hours. And if you don't receive that email, you can reach out to Emma Herman. So again, just a final thank you for spending some time today with us. And we really believe that using this model, you'll be able to achieve anything your system desires.